Live from Jonesborough, Tennessee, the storytelling capital of the world, and broadcasting from the International Storytelling Center, it's Jonesborough's original storytelling radio hour, A Night with the Yarn Exchange. Tonight is our haunted Jonesborough episode. We've got a lot of scary stories for you tonight from right here in this region. So you just might want to grab hold of that hand next to you and make sure there's someone attached to it. We've also got some treats in store for you. Tonight, our very own Brett McCluskey, along with Michelle Brown, will be our musical guests. They'll be performing one of Brett's new compositions later in the show. But before we go any further, we do want to thank our sponsors.
We couldn't do this show without you, so thank you, Appalachian Light and Sound.
And Mountain States Health Alliance, providing excellent health care and preventive care in the Northeast Tennessee region.
We'd also like to thank the Tennessee Arts Commission for their generous support of this program.
Tonight's show is also brought to you by the makers of parsley. Yes, parsley, that smooth, easygoing flavor that enhances every meal. Sprinkle it on or garnish a dish.
It just tastes better with parsley.
And, of course, frozen toast. Moms, do mornings come too early for you? Then frozen toast is the answer. From the freezer to the toaster, what could be simpler than frozen toast? Hit it, kids.
It's a breakfast sensation that coast to coast.
What do you want for breakfast, kids?
Frozen toast.
I think those were kids. Thank you, kids. Are all dressed up tonight. Well, folks, it's that time of year when the air is crisp and ghost stories are told around campfires. It's the haunted Jonesborough episode.
Hey, Lori, where do baby ghosts go during the day?
Well, I'll play along. I don't know, Chelsea. Where do baby ghosts go during the day?
To a scare center.
Hey, Lori, who did Frankenstein take to the prom?
Well, I don't know, Perry. Who did Frankenstein take to the prom?
His ghoul friend.
Hey, Lori, where do zombies go for a swim?
Okay, Sadie, I don't know. Where do zombies go for a swim?
The Dead Sea, get it?
I get it, Sadie, I get it, and I think we all get it. You kids are ready for some Halloween stories, and I can't blame you.
You know, Lori, we don't have to wait for Halloween before spooky things happen. Think about it. It's not every town that has a paranormal institute in the middle of downtown, ready to give haunted town tours all year long. Not every town has a history like ours, with so many old buildings and roads. Some of our stories reach far into the past, but some of them happened not too long ago. You'd be surprised about the strange things that happen in this Appalachian region.
I'm from over in Elkton. There's an abandoned 19th century bridge that stands 100 feet above the Elk River. No one goes on it anymore. One night, a long time ago, a mother and her infant child were crossing the bridge in a carriage. When the carriage wheel broke, flipping the carriage into the river, both passengers died. To this day, if you go out to the bridge at night, you can hear the eerie cries of that baby and mother.
Did you hear about the witches in Rockvale? In the early 1800s, there were 3 women who were condemned as witches and buried in the Dyer Cemetery. At night, when you go out there, strange things still happen. You can hear voices as if they are calling to you.
Come here, my child, and help me.
Like voices calling you for help. But when you go to help
me find revenge.
you feel something touch or grab you. Some folks have had their faces scratched by something like a straw broom when they stand near the cedar trees at the front gate. There are reports about these strange red balls in the middle of the cemetery near the cluster of the cedar trees. The balls rise up from the trunks, rising to the top of the trees, then disappear. Many believe they are the 3 witches.
I went to Flintville Elementary School before we moved here. The school was built where the railroad tracks used to be. Well, the tracks had to be moved because of all the flooding. Well, on the school grounds at night, even sometimes early in the evening, you can see a man with a lantern out there where the tracks used to be.
I saw him one time with my mommy. She got scared. I thought it was cool. I thought it was neat.
I worked in a store in downtown Johnson City in the late 60s, and the town was still bustling before malls and shopping centers. It was late when I took the night deposit to the bank at the corner of Roan and Main. After I put the money in the night deposit, I was ready to go home. But I always paused, looked up and down Main to see if I could see it, or perhaps to make sure it wasn't there. It hadn't been seen for a while. I was looking for the Wampus Cat. Sightings were documented in police files. A cat-like creature, 5.5 feet tall, walking on its fours till it got to a storefront. Then, standing on its hind legs and looking in, mostly at the mannequins dressed for a fancy ball. The creature's eyes reflected back from the storefronts like lasers, piercing, daunting, eerie, and scary. Then the creature would walk on its hind legs, disappearing into the shadows. I heard later of the events that caused this creature to exist, and it didn't happen far from here. It started simply enough at the Oak Hill School at the turn of the century. Not this century, the last one. And where the Oak Hill School used to stand, not where it sits today in Jonesborough. The story goes that June and Jane were finishing their educations.
8 years is plenty of school. It's time to start a family.
I agree. We're soon to be 15. We don't want to become old maids.
That would be awful, to end up like Llewellyn. She stayed in school through the 11th grade, and now she's 19 and still not married. Poor old thing.
When we get married, June, promise me we'll live next to each other no matter what.
Yes, and you must promise the same thing.
They would surely maintain their friendship throughout their lifetimes. June's grandmother came from the Cherokee Nation and was employed by the textile mills in Kingsport. Jane's grandmother worked with her. This was a friendship of generations.
If we have girls, they'll grow up to be best friends and sew together like us.
And if we have boys, then we'll work together and hunt together and be best friends.
But if one had a girl and one had a boy, they agreed that would be the best scenario by far.
They'll grow up together, fall in love, and get married, and then we'll have grandchildren together. Oh, Jane, wouldn't that be wonderful?
It didn't take but a few years out of school, and they both were married and both had a child. First, Jane had a son named Jesse, and then June had a daughter named Catherine. The matchmaking began. The two young women were made sure their children spent lots of time together. They thought they had blown their plans when for years their children fought like cats and dogs, or more like brother and sister. But then it happened. An argument caused them to stare into each other's eyes, with contempt at first, but they saw into each other's hearts and realized they were in love. Nothing could separate them. In a short time, the families cut out a parcel of land and built them a cabin, and the wedding was planned.
I took Catherine shopping for a dress. We walked up and down Main Street in Johnson City looking in the windows at the beautiful dresses for one suitable for her wedding. There was no need to buy a dress, though. Catherine saw the one she wanted, and I estimated the amount of fabric it would take to make it. Then we went to Parks and Belk and bought cloth. We went home and cut a pattern out of newspapers, and it was a beautiful dress for her wedding.
No one could be happier. Till one day, when Jesse was supposed to go hunting with two of his friends. Something came up and the two friends had to wait a day. So Jesse went ahead to the Cherokee Mountains to set up camp and waited for them. Cherokee legend told of the Ewa, a huge, hairy monster that came and went. Jesse had never been afraid to go off by himself, and he wasn't about to let a legend ruin a good hunt. Jesse must have set up camp before anything happened. Provisions were stored, but when his hunting companions came upon the camp, his horse had been eaten at the fire. Jesse was nowhere to be found. They knew it was the Ewa. There were signs of the monster leaving the camp, and then they found Jesse's tracks and followed them to a cave. They coaxed Jesse out of the cave, and when he came out, his hair had turned white, and he couldn't speak. There was a blank stare on his face. The Ewa had scared him near to death. They took him back to Catherine.
I called for the doctor while Catherine sat by his side. The doctor came, but Jesse couldn't communicate. He just sat and stared off into space, and he had no appetite. They gave him herbs and poultices, but nothing could bring him back. Catherine watched over for nearly a year until he died. All of our hearts were broken.
Jesse's death shook the families to the core, but it did something more to Catherine. She grieved in a way no one had ever seen. She made up her mind to exact revenge on the creature that had stolen her husband at any cost.
She knew this was possible. My mother, Catherine's grandmother, had come from the Cherokee tribe in North Carolina and told her of the power of the medicine woman in the tribe, that she could cast spells. Catherine went to the Cherokee village and sought out the medicine woman.
I understand if you want to do this. You must spend the season with me learning. But you must know it would be better to go back and live your life and forget revenge.
Catherine would have none of it and assisted the medicine woman. She spent weeks making a mask from the head of a mountain lion. She then gave it emerald eyes out of the stones from her native land. She conjured up a powder to treat the mask, to bring to life a creature to conquer the Ewa. Finally, the medicine woman told Catherine,
I'll ask you but one more time. It'll be far better for you to walk away now than to take on this task. I beg you to walk away.
But Catherine took the mask, and we knew nothing about it. She came back to our family telling us she had a journey to make before she could have peace. If I truly knew what she was doing, I would never have let her go. It was the last time I ever saw her as I remembered her.
Catherine took the Wampus mask headed toward the last camp of her departed husband. She put on the mask and discovered that through the emerald eyes she could see in the dark like the forest creatures. As she walked, she felt her fingers turn into claws. She felt her teeth turn into fangs. She felt her body turn to solid muscle. She felt her skin turn into the hide of a lion. She arrived at the campsite and sat where Jesse must have sat when the monster overtook him. With hearing afforded that of a creature of the night, she heard the monster approach. She bowed her head so it couldn't see her eyes. She could feel, hear, smell, sense the monster coming nearer and nearer. When it was within her range, she leapt into it, fighting with her teeth and claws. She was tearing flesh and burning through its eyes with her piercing gaze. They even knocked her back to turn and run. She was on its back immediately and overpowered the monster. Then she went back to the camp and lay down to rest. She slept sounder than she had in a year. When she awoke, she began her walk back towards home. She stopped at a pool and peered into the water to see her reflection, a hideous cat-like appearance. She tried to remove the mask, but it would not come off. She pulled at her hide, but it could not be removed. She ran on all fours towards her home. She saw her father in the field, but when he saw her, he ran back to his house and pointed a rifle out the window. For weeks, she lurked around the farm of her parents and her friends. She crept close enough to hear the conversations about how the Iwa took Jesse and how it must have taken Catherine. She couldn't bear the pain of seeing her family suffer, so she retreated back to the Cherokee forest.
It is believed that for a time in the late evenings in Johnson City, Catherine, the Wampus Cat, returned to window shop for dresses that she could make. If only she hadn't sought revenge for her beloved Jesse. Then, after several years, the creature was no longer spotted. Perhaps she went back to the mountains and died. And she may still walk the streets, window shopping in the dark of night. Look closely when you leave tonight. Did something move in the shadows?
That one gives me chills. Leon Overbay related that story to us last year. He was the young man who worked at Parks and Belks in the 60s. Now, some may say that's only a myth. Who knows? It may be. But there are stories here in Jonesborough where the truth is stranger than fiction, and no one knows that better than our historian Angie Fellers Mason. And here she is from the Heritage Alliance with another installment of Ask the Historian.
Thank you, Lori. Come with me for a moment, and we'll go back in time. It's late 1800s, and it's time for a family picture. Pictures are rare, and only for special occasions. So you don your best outfit, and gather with the rest of the family in the parlor. Everyone is posed around your Aunt Mildred. She's the focal point. You stand very still, trying not to breathe too much. You don't want the photo to blur. This will be the only family picture with Aunt Mildred, because she passed away 2 days ago, and her body will be interred tomorrow. Death photography. It's weird to us today. It seems morbid and macabre, but it was a common custom in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Death was an extremely common factor in life, especially the death of young children, and death photography was a way to get a picture with the deceased before the chance was gone forever. In the Jonesborough, Washington County History Museum and Archives, we have lots of artifacts, including Victorian mourning artifacts. The Victorian period, which spanned the mid-1800s through the early 1900s, saw the creation and rise of a middle class with expendable income. This income could be used on things like death photographs. It was also a period when older customs adapted to newer times and the world as a whole was industrializing at a rapid rate. We have two good examples of Victorian mourning customs. The first is the death drawing of young James William Dederick. Ella's going to take that around. Death drawings were another popular way to memorialize the dead, and young ladies of the family would draw these. The deceased was usually drawn inside the coffin, eyes open, to give an appearance of life. According to the Dedrick family, who lived in the house beside the cemetery, James and his sister were playing in the cemetery when a grave marker fell and killed him. He is buried in the old Jonesborough Cemetery. Our other example is this beautiful wreath made of human hair. And Red's going to take us around. All right. The Victorians made jewelry, wreaths, and other mementos from the hair of loved ones. Wreaths like this one would often contain hair from several different loved ones, with the flower in the center of the horseshoe made from the hair of the family member who died most recently. The top of the wreath was left open to symbolize the ascent of the soul to heaven. Which begs the question, what are things we do today that future generations will look back on and go, oh, that's so macabre?
Thank you, Anne. Well, I think I need a break from these spooky stories, so now just might be the perfect time for a station break. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to A Night with the Jonesborough Yarn Exchange of WETS 89.5 FM out of Johnson City, Tennessee.